My name is Claire. I live in a very busy part of Chicago and work as an architect. My job is to design buildings that can withstand the test of time, whose foundations are so strong that no storm can shake them. I always pay the most attention to the foundation. But little did I know that the foundation of my own family had become so hollow on the inside. On that freezing, foggy November morning last year, when my older sister Madison called, the strongest foundation of my life was shaken to its core. It was exactly 6 a.m. Chicago was freezing cold and my window panes were frosted over. I was standing in my kitchen. I had a warm mug of coffee in my hand and was just about to start my day. Suddenly the screen of my phone on the counter lit up. Madison's name was flashing on the screen. Madison and I are biological sisters, but we rarely spoke. So, her calling this early in the morning was nothing short of an alarm bell. I answered the phone and put it on speaker so I could make my coffee at the same time. The voice that came through the moment I picked up had no sadness, no hesitation, no panic. Madison's voice was exactly like someone in a business meeting, completely flat and to the point. Without beating around the bush, she said straight out, "Claire, Grandma is no more. She passed away last night." The coffee mug in my hand just froze in midair. A strange, deafening silence echoed in my ears. My grandmother, my sweet Eleanor, who was the most precious person in the world to me, was gone. I was about to say something, maybe a word was about to slip out of my mouth, but Madison didn't even give me a chance to speak. She immediately continued. She said, "And listen, there is no need for you to come here to Boston. Grandma has left everything, her old house, all her bank accounts, and all her savings. To me and my husband Greg, you have no place in her papers, so don't waste your time and money." I heard another voice in the background. It was Greg's voice, Madison's husband. He was laughing very softly. I heard him whisper, "Finally, this girl is out of our way for good." Madison hung up without waiting for my reply. Absolute silence fell over my kitchen. The phone screen went black. I just stood there. I couldn't understand whether to mourn my grandmother's passing or be furious at my own sister's disgusting behavior. A granddaughter whose grandmother had just left this world, instead of grieving, was calling her sister at 6 a.m. to tell her she wouldn't get a dime from the estate. But there was one thing Madison and her greedy husband Greg had absolutely no idea about. They didn't know that the funeral they were planning, after which they were dreaming of living it up on Grandma's money and selling her house, had its entire script written by Grandma herself. And most importantly, they didn't know that Grandma had left something in that old oak tree house that would blow all of Madison and Greg's carefully spun lies to pieces. This story is for everyone who has ever been underestimated by their own family, who is made to feel that decency means stupidity, and who is expected to quietly take every injustice. If you have ever been through such a situation, then listen to this story to the end, because today, a quiet person, with complete dignity and without even raising her voice, is going to take back what is rightfully hers. To understand this whole story, we have to go back a little, about 9 months ago. I was working day and night at a very large and renowned architecture firm in Chicago. I had moved from a small town to this big city. I had a massive student loan debt hanging over my head, and my only goal was to pay off all my debts before I turned 40. I was working 60-hour weeks. If I had anyone to call my own in this whole world, it was my grandmother Eleanor. She was 71 years old and lived on the outskirts of Boston in a very beautiful, old but sturdy wood and brick house. My grandfather built this house with his own hands in 1975. Since my grandfather passed away, Grandma had been living in that house alone. Grandma was a very independent, strong, and principled woman. She took care of her garden herself, did minor repairs around the house herself, and she absolutely hated taking anyone's help. Grandma used to call me often on Sunday afternoons. Her voice still had that same old firmness and sweetness. She would always joke with me, "Claire, you spend so much time building huge buildings all over the world in Chicago. Take some time out and come here to fix my old roof too." I would always laugh and say I would come soon. Grandma didn't have a lot of cash, but that house, which was now mortgage-free, and whatever little life savings she had in her bank account, that was her whole world. She was living a very quiet and peaceful life. On the other hand, there was my sister Madison. Madison is 4 years older than me, but in terms of maturity, she was always miles behind. She lived right in the middle of Boston, just a 30-minute drive from Grandma's house. Madison was always obsessed with designer clothes, expensive cars, big parties, and showing off. She married Greg, who was a real estate agent. Greg was exactly like Madison, a man always chasing money. Madison only visited Grandma when she needed money for a new necessity or a new hobby. Grandma knew this very well. She often told me that Madison's feet never touch the ground. She is always building castles in the air. Everything started to change on a pleasant October afternoon. I got news that Grandma had fallen while working in the back of her garden. She had fractured the bone in her right arm. It wasn't a huge tragedy. Just a minor surgery was needed, a few pins, and a cast for 6 to 8 weeks. As soon as I got the news, I took time off work and caught the next morning's flight to Boston. When I reached the hospital and walked into Grandma's room, I was a little surprised by the scene. Madison was already there. She had put on a very rehearsed soap opera-level look of sorrow on her face. She was sitting by Grandma's bed acting like the most caring and perfect granddaughter in the world. Greg was in the room too. He was talking to Grandma's surgeon. He was shaking the doctor's hand with such warmth, as if he was closing a deal on a massive property. The moment Greg saw me, he came over and put a very familiar hand on my shoulder. There was a strange sugary sweetness in his voice. He said, "Oh, Claire, why did you come all the way from Chicago? You must have projects to finish. You are always short on time anyway. You go back. We will take care of the family." At that time, I truly felt that maybe they wanted to help. I thought that maybe the family had come together in hard times, but it took me months to realize that they were making their very first and most cunning move to keep me away from Grandma. I am a designer by profession. I have a habit of keeping track of every tiny detail. I started acting like a nurse in the hospital. I asked the doctor for Grandma's medical file, wanted to see the full list of her medications, and wanted to know what her routine would be after going home. As soon as I asked for the papers, Madison immediately interrupted me. She said in a very sweet but biting voice, "Claire, sweetie, don't you worry at all. We have handled everything. All the paperwork is perfectly safe with me. Grandma will stay with us at our house until her cast comes off. How will you manage everything from so far away?" Grandma, who was lying on the bed and was a bit drowsy from the medication, gave me a thumbs up with her good left hand. She smiled and said, "I'm fine, honey. Don't mess up your work. They will take care of me." I said goodbye to Grandma with a heavy heart and flew back to Chicago. To this day, I regret that mistake. I should never have left that room until I had every single piece of paper in my own hands. November arrived. Grandma was at Madison and Greg's house, and this is where the first document of that deep conspiracy surfaced. Grandma's right hand was in a cast. She couldn't sign checks, couldn't pay any bills herself. So Greg called a notary to his house and had Grandma sign a limited power of attorney with her left hand. Greg told Grandma that this was solely for paying house bills, covering hospital expenses, and taking care of minor essential tasks. This document was legally completely valid. Any normal person in that situation would have signed it. I would have too. And that is the biggest victory for scammers. A crime never starts with a massive fraud. It always begins as a small favor, a tiny gesture of help. Madison posted a picture on social media that week. In the picture, Grandma was sitting at Madison's dining table with a bowl of soup in front of her. Madison's caption read, "Blessed to get the chance to care for my daddy and Grandma. Family is everything." People from all over town liked and commented on that post. But the story behind the scenes was entirely different. My Sunday phone calls were now being answered by Madison instead of Grandma. Whenever I called, Madison had the same rehearsed answers. "Claire, Grandma is sleeping right now. Claire, Grandma is very tired right now. She is in pain. Claire, I will put you through later." 3 straight weeks went by, and I didn't even hear my grandmother's voice. My anxiety started growing. Grandma's old phone broke, or so Madison told me, so I bought a very simple new smartphone, set up my number in it, and couriered it to Madison's address in Grandma's name. I thought now Grandma could talk to me directly. The parcel delivery report came through, but that phone never reached Grandma's hands. When I asked Madison, she very casually said, "Oh, that phone. Grandma doesn't understand this new technology and touch screens." She was getting frustrated, so I packed it back up and put it away. Deep down, I started feeling very strongly that something was terribly wrong. My grandmother was a woman who could fix her own home's water heater. She was not the kind of person to be afraid of a smartphone. I told Madison in plain words that I needed to talk to Grandma on a video call no matter what, or give me her doctor's number so I could speak to them myself. But every time Madison would build a new, soft wall in front of me. One day on the phone, she said something I will never forget. She said, "Claire, you chose a different career and a different life by going to Chicago. Now let the people who stayed here, who dropped everything to care for Grandma, do their job. Don't cause trouble by interfering for no reason." I knew arguing on the phone wouldn't solve anything. In December, when Christmas time rolled around, I arrived in Boston without telling anyone. I went to Madison's house. When she opened the door, the color drained from her face the moment she saw me. She panicked. She forced a smile and said, "Oh, you, why didn't you tell us you were coming?" I walked straight into the living room without answering her. The sight in the living room broke my heart. My grandmother, who was always the life of every gathering, who always sat brightly in the center of the house, was today sitting completely shrunk down on a small chair in a dark corner of that large room. She looked like she had lost a lot of weight. That old glow and spark on her face was completely gone. She definitely smiled when she saw me, but there was a strange fear and helplessness in her eyes. I immediately went to Grandma and sat by her feet. I asked, "Grandma, how are you? How is the pain in your arm?" The moment I asked the question, Madison immediately jumped in. Yes, she is absolutely fine. Her pain is much less now. We are taking full care of her." Whatever I asked Grandma, Madison or Greg would answer. It was as if Grandma wasn't even allowed to speak. I finally got a chance to talk to Grandma alone when Madison and Greg went to the kitchen to get drinks. Grandma looked at me, glanced around to make sure no one was listening, and then said in a very low and trembling voice, "Claire, honey, my bank account feels a bit light these days. I don't see any papers or statements at home. Greg says everything has gone online into his computer." I instantly sensed danger. As soon as Greg came back, I said in a very calm manner, "Greg, can we sit down and take a look at Grandma's bank statements and expenses once, just so I can help out financially too?" Greg's face instantly hardened. A flash of anger showed in his eyes for a second, and then he immediately went on the defensive, saying, "Why are you talking like a lawyer about family matters, Claire? We are covering all of Grandma's expenses. Are you suspicious of us?" Madison immediately started her crying act. She started saying that she was working day and night to serve Grandma and I was coming from the outside and throwing accusations at them. Grandma watched all this drama. She was a very decent and sorted woman. She didn't want any conflict. She put her hand on mine and said, "Let it be, honey. It's Christmas today. Don't make a scene in the house today. I am fine." I returned from there that day, but alarm bells were ringing loudly in my head. In January, I threw myself back into my work in Chicago. But now Madison had completely stopped picking up my phone calls. There was no reply to my messages. Frustrated, I went to Boston once again in February. This time, instead of going to Madison's house, I went straight to Grandma's old house. The sight outside Grandma's house was terrifying. There was dead silence outside. Despite the winter, the lawn grass was heavily overgrown. A pile of letters and bills was jammed into the mailbox. The window curtains were completely drawn. It looked as if no one had been in that house for weeks or months, as if the house had forgotten how to breathe. From there, I went straight to Madison's house. Madison only opened the door halfway. She didn't let me inside. She said, "Claire, Grandma isn't here. She went on a religious trip out of town with some of her old friends. You picked a really bad time to come." That was a blatant, filthy lie. My grandmother, at 71 years of age in the dead of winter, and with a broken arm, could not possibly have gone on any religious trip. She just wasn't the kind of person to leave without telling anyone. I returned empty-handed, but I hadn't given up. Deep down, I was searching for evidence and ways to fight back. The first week of May arrived. The weather in Chicago was getting a little better. Suddenly I got a call on my phone from an unknown number. I answered. A very quiet, terrified woman's voice came from the other side. She was a nurse named Clara, someone I knew from my college days. Clara worked at a very basic and cheap nursing home called Willow Creek Manor on the outskirts of Boston. She said very hesitantly, "Claire, I don't know if I should be calling you or not, but there is an elderly woman admitted here at Willow Creek since March. Every day, every nurse on every shift, she asks them if anyone knows an architect named Claire. She says you are her granddaughter. Her name is Eleanor." The phone almost slipped from my hand. I stood paralyzed in my own home. Nobody, not a single person in my own family had told me even once that my grandmother had been put in a nursing home. I was constantly being told that she was living very comfortably and lovingly at Madison's house. Clara finally said something that forced me to grab my car keys immediately. She said, "Claire, your grandmother doesn't look like she belongs here. She is perfectly healthy. It feels like someone has intentionally hidden her away here." I didn't call Madison. I didn't call Greg. Some things aren't discussed over the phone. They are dealt with face to face, in broad daylight, and with paperwork. I immediately got my car out and hit the road from Chicago to Boston. That entire drive was like a nightmare for me. Only one thought kept racing through my mind. What condition must my grandmother be in? When I reached Willow Creek Manor, seeing the state of the place made me want to cry. It was an old building in a very desolate part of town. The moment I walked in, I was hit by the smell of bleach and a strange dampness. They were severely understaffed, and the elderly people there were sitting on chairs watching TV like abandoned souls. Without asking anyone at the reception, I looked straight at the register and ran towards the East Wing room. The moment I opened the door to that small, dimly lit room, my heart shattered into pieces. My grandmother, who always roamed like a free bird in her home's garden, who had lived her entire life on her own terms, was today sitting quietly in a small, damp room by a window that wouldn't even open. She was wearing a very loose, baggy hospital gown. She must have lost at least 20 pounds. As soon as the door made a sound, she looked up. Her eyes were still the same, sharp and understanding everything. She saw me, and tears started streaming down her face. She said in a very trembling voice, "You finally remembered me, Claire. I thought you too had left me here to die like Madison did. Those people told me you knew everything, and you agreed to me staying here." I ran and hugged her, and we both cried for a long time. They hadn't just hidden her. They had hidden us from each other. They lied to both of us against each other. Grandma told me that in early March, Greg told her the roof of her house was leaking and under repair, so she just had to stay at this facility for 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks never ended. When Grandma insisted on going back, Greg stopped visiting altogether. Grandma had no phone, no money. She needed staff permission to make a call to the outside world, and the staff was never around. Grandma had kept my number written on an old receipt in her purse, but she was never able to call me. I asked Grandma some basic questions. The date, the month, the president's name. She answered everything flawlessly. My grandmother's mind was perfectly healthy. She whispered in my ear, "Claire, I don't know what papers Greg used to get me admitted here, but I have never signed another piece of paper since that day." I stormed into the nursing home manager's office like a hurricane. I kept my voice very loud and stern. I asked the manager on whose authority a perfectly healthy woman was being kept here. The manager panicked. He nervously opened his file and said that Mr. Gregg had shown power of attorney documents and stated that Grandma needed help with daily living activities. I told the manager in very clear terms, my grandmother does not have any mental illness. She is capable of making her own decisions. She is being discharged right now and coming with me. If you try to stop me even once, I will call the state medical board and the police right here, right now, and get this whole place shut down. The manager was speechless. Within 20 minutes, my grandmother was sitting at the manager's desk, signing her own discharge papers. She signed them with her right hand, which was now completely healed. As soon as we got in the car, Grandma looked at me and said, "Claire, those people think they have buried me in files forever. Don't tell them yet that I am free from here." I took Grandma straight to Mr. Harrison, a very experienced and sharp lawyer located right in the middle of downtown Boston. Mr. Harrison specialized in these kinds of cases. First, he contacted the bank and pulled Grandma's entire bank statements for the last 6 months. It was an 11-page statement. When we started reading it, the ground slipped from under our feet. In those 6 months, while Grandma was locked in a small, smelly room eating hospital food, $187,000 had been withdrawn from her account. $46,000 of that was withdrawn under the guise of care expenses. $89,000 was transferred to the account of a company named BV Capital. BV stood for Braden and Voss, which was Greg's own shell company. The rest of the money went towards paying Madison's credit card bills, designer clothes, and the installments for Greg's new car. My grandmother's entire life savings had vanished in one fell swoop. But that was nothing. At the very back of that file was another document. It was a home equity line of credit application, a loan application against Grandma's old house. The loan amount was $150,000. And that application had my grandmother's signature with the date of April 14th. On April 14th, my grandmother was locked in that nursing home, and no one had visited her. Mr. Harrison handed another document to us. It was a full power of attorney. This wasn't the power of attorney Grandma had signed in November just for paying bills. This was a new, full authority power of attorney dated January 12th. On the strength of this single piece of paper, Greg had played this entire game. Grandma took that paper in her hand. She looked very closely at the signature on it. Then she looked at Mr. Harrison and said in a very calm voice, "This is not my signature. Someone has forged my name very neatly, but this is not me." Harrison took off his glasses and said, "Mrs. Eleanor, if we take this fraud to court, it will be a very long civil battle. Greg is very cunning. He will tell the court that you gave him verbal permission to do all this. In such cases, it is very difficult to press criminal charges unless we have solid evidence that proves the document is entirely forged, and that too, in front of a witness. Fraud committed behind closed doors just makes a case, but if that fraud is proven in front of people, it leads straight to jail." Grandma kept staring at that paper. Suddenly, a very old and very sharp spark returned to her eyes. She looked at me and said, "Claire, let's go. Take me to my house." We reached Grandma's house in the afternoon, when we knew Greg would be in his office, and Madison would be at her kitty party. The locks on the house had been changed, but Greg didn't know that I had kept a spare key to the back door of this house on my keychain since childhood. We went inside. The sight inside the house could break anyone's heart. There was a strange, stale smell in the air. All the belongings, drawers, and cupboards were left wide open. It looked as if someone had ruthlessly ransacked the entire house. Grandma's old documents, some of her jewelry, everything was gone. Madison had completely looted the house. Grandma saw all this, but she didn't stop. She went straight to her old bedroom. She opened the bottom section of her old oak wardrobe. There were a lot of old clothes there. Among them hung an old, heavy brown coat that belonged to my grandfather. Greg and Madison had left that coat behind, thinking it was useless. Grandma pulled out that coat. She took a small knife and started ripping the lining of the coat's inner pocket. From inside that thick lining emerged an old, yellowed envelope. Grandma handed that envelope to me and, taking a very deep breath, said, "Claire, when I was in the hospital in November, I already had a feeling from Greg and Madison's behavior that their intentions were not right. I may be 71 years old, but I am not a fool. So, with the help of a trusted nurse at the hospital, I had a new and absolutely genuine will made and had it notarized right there in the hospital. And that day in March, when Greg was kicking me out of my house to send me to the nursing home, I somehow managed to buy 2 minutes of time and hid this envelope here, because I knew Greg's eyes would never look at this old coat. I opened that paper. It clearly stated in plain words that Eleanor leaves her entire estate, her house, and all her savings to her only responsible granddaughter Claire, because Madison and Greg had betrayed her. But the real treasure wasn't that will. Grandma pulled another file out of that coat. It was her old hospital records and prescriptions. The prescriptions from January 12th. I cross-checked those prescriptions against that fake power of attorney. On January 12th, from 9 in the morning until 11:30 in the afternoon, my grandmother was at the Boston Orthopedic Clinic, where she was undergoing a minor procedure on her arm and was under light anesthesia. A nurse had signed her chart every 15 minutes, and the notary stamp on Greg's fake power of attorney was from 10:15 in the morning. And that too from the office of a notary Greg knew, 20 miles away from that clinic. How could a person be unconscious in one city and signing a legal document in another city at the exact same time? That paper wasn't just lying. That paper itself was screaming the evidence of its own forgery. Grandma sat down in a chair. All the sorrow was gone from her face now, replaced by a very cold and dangerous resolve. She said, "Dead men don't sign papers, Claire. Greg has relied on a fake stamp. Now we will show him how a real forgery is exposed." That same night in my apartment, we devised a very precise plan. Grandma said that if we went to the police right away, Greg would say Grandma had lost her mind and try to prove her insane. He would drag the court dates on, and the house would be sold by then. Grandma wanted them exposed in front of the whole town, in front of all those people from whom Madison had gathered fake sympathy. We brought in a very old friend of Grandma's, Mr. Thomas. Mr. Thomas had run a funeral home in Boston for the last 40 years. He was highly respected in the city. When Mr. Thomas found out the whole truth, he was stunned for a moment. Then he said he would fully support us in this charade. On Thursday evening, Mr. Thomas sat on his porch and called Madison. Grandma and I were listening on speaker. Mr. Thomas's voice had that professional sorrow that comes with 40 years of experience. He said in a very heavy voice, "Madison, child, this is Mr. Thomas speaking. I am so sorry. Your grandmother Eleanor suffered a sudden heart attack this evening at the nursing home and has left us forever." A very long 3-second silence fell over the phone. And what came out of Madison's mouth after that silence ended whatever little relationship I had left with my sister forever. Madison didn't ask how Grandma passed, if she was in any pain, or where her body was. A deep sigh of relief escaped Madison's lips, and she asked, "Mr. Thomas, did she have any papers? I mean, have any of her old documents or files come to you?" Grandma's face was completely emotionless, but her fists clenched tight. A granddaughter, hearing the news of her grandmother's death, was asking about her papers. Thomas, handling the situation, said that whatever papers there were would probably be with a lawyer, and he would hold a memorial service for Grandma on Sunday at the community hall. And then, at 6 o'clock on Friday morning, Madison made that call to me that I mentioned at the beginning. She had told me that I would get nothing. I had also told her that I would definitely come to the memorial service on Sunday. Sunday afternoon arrived. Boston's old community hall was packed. 60 to 70 people were sitting on chairs. The old folks from town, Grandma's neighbors, church ladies, everyone was there. Right at the front of the hall, a very beautiful but closed casket was placed. A closed casket because no one was allowed to open it. White lilies were decorated everywhere, flowers my grandmother absolutely despised. Madison was sitting right in the front row. She was wearing a brand new, very expensive black designer dress. She had tissue paper in her hands and would make crying sounds exactly when someone looked her way. Greg, in a black suit, was walking around the hall like he was some big politician. He was patting people's shoulders, gathering fake condolences, and clutching a blue folder in his pocket. I stood quietly near the back door of the hall. In my hands was the folder holding the truth buried inside it. My heart was beating very fast, but my hands were completely cold and steady. Mr. Harrison was sitting in the corner with me, holding his briefcase. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, Mr. Thomas came on stage. He adjusted the microphone and said, "Before we share memories of Eleanor, her family has requested to share a few things with you, all regarding her last wishes and her documents." Greg's chest puffed out. He immediately got up from his seat and walked onto the stage with total confidence, almost strutting. He grabbed the mic, bowed his head for a moment to feign sorrow, and then started speaking. He said, "Eleanor wasn't just our grandmother. She was the pillar of this entire family. But in her final days she made some very tough decisions, which we must respect." Saying this, Greg pulled that paper from his pocket. Waving it in front of the whole hall, he said, "This is Eleanor's last will, which she made this year on April 20th. According to this will, she leaves this house, all her bank accounts, and her entire estate to my wife Madison and me." A very strange murmuring swept through the 60 people in the hall. People started looking at each other in shock. The whole town knew how much Grandma loved me and how much she clashed with Madison. This wasn't sitting right with anyone. Greg should have stopped right there, but a greedy man never knows when to stop. He saw me standing at the far end of the hall. A very disgusting and venomous smile appeared on his face. He raised his voice a bit on the mic and said, "And this will clearly states that her younger granddaughter Claire will not get a single penny from this estate, because Claire abandoned her in her final days, and for reasons Claire herself knows very well." Greg had told this filthy lie in front of so many people, with such shamelessness, that every person in the hall started looking at me with suspicion. But I didn't move an inch from my spot. Mr. Harrison opened his briefcase. Just then, Mr. Thomas, standing on the stage, stepped closer to the mic and said in a very soft voice, "The date of April 20th. That is a very strange date for a signature, Mr. Greg." Greg looked at Thomas in surprise, and at that exact moment, the heavy wooden side door of the hall opened. The creak of that door's old hinges echoed through the entire hall. And seeing the person who walked through that door, time in the entire hall seemed to stand still. My grandmother, Eleanor, wearing a very beautiful deep blue dress, walking on her own 2 feet, with her back completely straight, she entered the hall. Her hair was very neatly tied. Her eyes were piercingly sharp. Her face was red with anger, but there was no hesitation, no weakness in her stride. She was walking exactly like a lioness. The breath caught in the throats of the people sitting in the hall. A glass of water slipped from a woman's hand, fell to the floor, and shattered into pieces. Someone stood up from their chair. Some people backed away in fear. Many women covered their mouths with their hands. When Madison saw Grandma, her face turned so pale it looked as if all the blood in her body had dried up in an instant. She collapsed back into her chair. The fake tears streaming from her eyes froze right there. Her mouth was left hanging open, but no sound came out. Greg stood frozen on the stage like a statue. The fake will in his hand was still hanging in the air. His body had started shaking. Grandma walked up to the stage very calmly, measuring every step. She pulled the mic towards her, looked straight into Greg's terrified eyes, and in a very steady, cold, but bone-chilling voice said, "Dead men don't sign papers, Greg, and they certainly don't leave their houses to frauds like you." All of Greg's confidence, his expensive suit, everything shattered to pieces in a split second. He started screaming loudly in a panic. He had lost his mind. "What nonsense is this? This is a conspiracy. This woman has gone insane. Claire has brainwashed her. She is elderly. She has dementia. She doesn't know what she's doing. She ran away from her nursing home." The whole hall was silent. More than 60 people were watching that man sinking and writhing on the stage. Grandma raised her hand, and whatever little whispering was in the hall died down too. Now it was my turn. Carrying that heavy folder in my hands, I walked down the center aisle and spread all those documents one by one on the guest table placed in front. I kept my voice perfectly calm, exactly how I keep it when giving a presentation at my firm. I addressed the whole hall and began to speak. I said, "These are the prescriptions from the orthopedic clinic on January 12th. On January 12th, from 9 in the morning until 11:30, my grandmother was under anesthesia. And this is the power of attorney that Mr. Gregg had registered on that same day, at that same time, at the office of a notary he knew 20 miles away. Can anyone tell me how an unconscious person can sign a document?" I showed the bank statements and read out line by line how $187,000 were transferred to Greg's shell company and Madison's accounts. I showed that loan application on the house, dated April 14th, when Grandma was locked up in the nursing home and Greg hadn't allowed anyone to visit her. And finally, I placed Grandma's real will, and that old envelope she had hidden in my grandfather's coat, on the table. I said, "And the April 20th will in Greg's hand. One of the 2 witnesses who signed it is an employee from Greg's own office who is present in this hall today." The employee sitting in the 4th row turned pale and quietly tried to slip away from there. Greg was drenched in sweat. He kept repeating that this was all a lie. No one had recorded his voice. He was being framed. Just then, 2 senior officers from the Boston police walked in through the main doors of the hall. My lawyer, Mr. Harrison, had handed the entire file to the police's economic offenses wing 3 days ago. A police officer walked straight up to Greg and said, "Mr. Greg Voss, we are placing you under arrest right now on serious charges of bank fraud, forgery, and holding an elderly person hostage to steal her money." Greg tried to trap the police officers with his smooth talking too. He said, "Officer, this is a family matter. We will sit down and sort it out amongst ourselves. This is a huge misunderstanding. You can't arrest me." But when the officers pulled out the handcuffs, his real face, the face of a cowardly and greedy man, came out. He started begging in front of Grandma. "Eleanor, forgive me. I will return every single penny. I was just investing that money for you, so your old age would be secure. Please don't send me to jail." Grandma looked at him with very merciless eyes and said, "You stole my freedom for 7 months, Greg. You left my house to be auctioned off by the bank. And you kept my granddaughter away from me. You decorated my funeral with my own money. Now you will suffer the consequences of your actions." The police put handcuffs on Greg and were taking him out. Madison was still sitting in her seat. She was crying, but this time her tears weren't for any cameras. They were real. They were tears of fear. She came up to Grandma and crying, she said, "Grandma, we were drowning in massive debt. We desperately needed money. Greg said this was all just a matter of a few days. We would get the house back. Forgive me, Grandma." And then she turned to me and said angrily, "Claire, you ruined everything. If you hadn't interfered, everything would have been fine." I walked up to her. I looked straight into her eyes. I said, "Madison, you called me at 6 o'clock this morning. You told me Grandma was dead and that I would get nothing. You didn't ask even once what Grandma said in her final moments or how she was. You only talked about money. You are my older sister, but today, the person who is walking out of this room taking back her everything, her respect, her family, and her rightful place, is me. And you are left with absolutely nothing." Hearing this, Madison collapsed to the floor and started sobbing uncontrollably. But no one in the hall felt even 1% of pity for her. Everyone had seen with their own eyes what she had done to her own grandmother for money. The police took Madison along with them for questioning too. That evening, when the crowd cleared, Grandma and I went back to that same old house. We called a new locksmith and had all the locks in the house changed. Grandma stepped inside the house and took a very deep breath. That old scent of the house, that sweet smell of wood was back. Grandma first opened her wardrobe and very lovingly stored my grandfather's heavy coat safely back inside. The next few months involved a lot of trips to the court, but the truth was on our side. The documents were testifying for themselves. Multiple serious charges of forgery, fraud, and elder abuse were filed against Greg. His real estate license was permanently revoked, which for a proud man like him was no less than a death sentence. He was sentenced to several years in prison. The bank recovered most of the money stolen from Grandma's account, and that loan application was canceled on the spot. Grandma's house was saved. Madison didn't go to jail because Greg took all the blame on himself, but she was put on 3 years probation and given a sentence of community service. Every weekend she has to go clean the rooms of the elderly at the exact same nursing home where she had left her grandmother to die. I found this court ruling to be highly accurate and poetic justice. I made some changes to my job in Chicago. Now I drive down to Boston every weekend. Grandma and I spend a lot of time together. Grandma now takes a special class once a month at the Boston Community Center. She teaches elderly men and women like herself how to keep their legal documents safe, how to understand a power of attorney, and how to protect themselves from greedy people within their own families. There are long lines of people waiting to sit in her class now. This was my story. A story where victory was won not with weapons, but with the right documents at the right time, fought with a very cool head. Family isn't always bound by blood. Family is the ones who respect you, who stand by you like a shield in your hard times, and who don't plot to auction off your house behind your back. My grandmother taught me that a person's real strength doesn't lie in their bank balance or their designer clothes. A person's real strength lies in the courage with which they stand up for the truth. As long as you are alive, never let your voice be suppressed. If something wrong is happening to you, dig up your documents, ask questions, and don't stop until you get your full rights. If you have ever been betrayed by a loved one, or if you have bravely faced your family's greed, definitely share your story in the comment section below. I personally read every single comment. And yes, if you liked this story, please like this video. And don't forget to subscribe to Bookbite Studio for more true, strong, and heartwarming stories like this. See you in the next story. Until then, take true care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you.